Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. Um, we have a great passel of stories for you this week. Um, so many things, including President Biden's cancer diagnosis, um, and associated insanity around that. Trump's new flying palace from Qatar, um, some economic update stuff, and some good news actually for people. I was going through my saved stories in my news app. Remembered I had saved a story about about the Justice Department continuing to defend a purpose-only abortion bill. So we'll get into all that. Um, but It was a long week last week. We had a little bit of a PR kerfluffle at my book publisher, which was fun. Um, but we resolved it with good aplomb. And if you haven't had a chance to watch Michael Anderson and I talk about current events in Trump's first 100 days, I did a live event last Tuesday on May 13th. If you head over to the YouTube channel, it was on YouTube. It was on Facebook as well, so the video should be there under lives. It was on Twitch, so if you're watching on Twitch, go back one video. Um, YouTube, it's under lives. And we had a great conversation for about an hour. It was a great live event. We had a lovely group of people, about a dozen or so, which is great for a Tuesday night, sort of thing. So we had a really great conversation. Um, Unfortunately, I spent the weekend on the phone. A lot of phone calls, a lot of reminiscing. Um, it was hard to sit down and do this today, especially because I already had a recording today. Um, a great author named John Bolton, who's done a illustrated book about his French Canadian and Algonquin heritage, um, called Our Grandmother's Tree. And so really great chat with him. And but this evening I come to everybody with a very heavy heart because um, an old friend from many years ago, when I lived in Denver and I worked at New Culture magazine, um, decided to take his own life last week. And they discovered his body on Friday. And when the news reached me a little while after the discovery, um, I kind of knew that was my weekend, sort of thing. Like, oh, this is what will be. Yeah, and it was. I haven't slept a ton in the last 4 days, so we've been a little slow moving today. Um, and I have our relationship was very unique. I worked for him. I worked with him when I worked at that magazine. I um his wife is one of my I'm her best friend. She's one of my best friends. And her and I have been kind of connected at the hip almost since the moment we met, sort of thing. And um, it's been a devastating loss to our entire friend group. I still talk to everyone but one from that business. We have maintained the friendship for I've been friends with these people for 14 years, and that business ended 12 years ago. I sat next to this man every day for 2.5 years, and we built a business together. We built Denver Fashion Week together. We did a lot, and it his passing was significant but not shocking. um, and as I understand it, he had been recently laid off, and as the old saying goes, every time the employment rate goes up, you kill 400 people. Well, this week, one of them was my friend. Um, and as I was talking to my mom last night, and I said, I don't know how to do this tomorrow. I don't know how to be on camera. I don't know how to go along and pretend everything's normal. I don't know how to sit down and do the news tomorrow. But one of the things that I learned from this man who passed was when in doubt, go to work. um, and one of the things he taught me was about, how to show up, how to toe the line, and how to do your job even when the circumstances are not ideal. And today the circumstances are not ideal. I am dead tired. Um, this is this morning's makeup job. Um, I would rather be curled up in bed right now, or playing video games with my friends, or just sat in a corner, to be honest with you. Um, but I know if he were still here and I said, yeah, I decided not to do the weekly news hour because I can't deal with that, he would think that's entirely absurd. Um, and, uh, and he would tell me to be here anyway. And so I showed up, which is what he would have insisted that I do, no matter what, no matter how hard it was, because this is the job. um, and I spent a lot of time last night wondering how I was going to talk about this, because I knew I couldn't sit here with you all and not explain to you why I'm maybe not as peppy as I normally am, why I'm not as, on top of it as usual, without saying, in my chosen family, in my greater network, there's been a passing, and it's very close to home. Um, and it's caused, I think everyone to take stock of a lot of things. And I just want to say the perfunctory, if you are struggling with mental health, suicidal thoughts, all this sort of thing, please don't forget to reach out. We say that every time someone passes, and this is an area where I have struggled as well for a very long time. And there are resources closer than you think. There are people that care closer than you think. Don't not be here for the caring. Um, it goes without saying that you leave an emotional hole and a lot of damage, and I know in that moment, none of that matters. It all falls away. I've been there many times. But I've also watched an ex wife cry. Um, I've watched his son drink. He was never a huge fan of me, actually. That's kind of the ironic part. We hadn't spoken in 12 years, actually. Um, and it's a lot. It has greater effects than you think. So I just want to remind everyone of that, and I'm carrying that with me today. So on that uncheery note, I usually say on a cheery note. On that uncheery note, we will turn to the headlines, and I want to start. There we go. I want to start with my saved news stories because there's some great ones in here. We'll start with the Prifazone story. So this was from a little while ago. I forget sometimes to go through these until after the broadcast, so we're gonna start with them. Um, so this is from Reuters. Trump to continue Biden's court defense of abortion drug Prifazone. It says here, government lawyers seek dismissal of lawsuit. Republican-led states challenge easier access to abortion drug, and U.S. Supreme Court rejected challenge by anti-abortion groups. President Donald Trump's administration on Monday pushed forward in defending U.S. rules easing access to the abortion drug mifepristone from a legal challenge that began during Democratic former President Joe Biden's administration. The U.S. Department of Justice, in brief filed in Texas federal court, urged a judge to dismiss the lawsuit by 3 Republican-led states on procedural grounds. While the filing does not discuss the merits of the state's case, it suggests the Trump administration is in no rush to drop the government's defense of mifepristone, used in more than 60% of U.S. abortions. Missouri, Kansas, and Idaho claim the U.S. Food and Drug Administration acted improperly when it eased restrictions on mifepristone, including by allowing it to be prescribed by telemedicine and dispensed by mail. The Justice Department and the Office of Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Trump said while campaigning last year that he did not plan to ban or restrict access to mifepristone. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. told Fox News in February that Trump has asked for a study on the safety of abortion pills and has not made a decision on whether to tighten restrictions on them. Last year, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a bid by anti-abortion groups and doctors to restrict access to the drug, finding they lacked legal standing to challenge the FDA regulations. This is good news. I'm sorry. This is good news. This, I mean, for for all of the bluster, and for all of the back and forth about abortion as an issue, the fact that they're continuing to slow roll this lawsuit and are trying to get it dismissed, it's a win, and we're going to take wins wherever we can get them. This is 110% a win for a woman's right to choose, for women's health care. I know that the background of this lawsuit is when Roe failed in 2019. It was 2019. When Roe failed, one of the things the FDA did was to expand was to expand abortion pill access so that women in red states via telemedicine and mail would still have access even though such things were banned in the state of their residence. And the FDA had that rule writing power. It's under Congress because it's interstate commerce. And so that was kind of where this whole thing started from. And this, you know, this is good news because this will continue to give women, it will do as it intended. It will continue to give women that type of access. I'm not quite sure whether they need another study. I remember when this drug came out, it was studied to death, but study is fine. Do a study. This is a win, and I'll take it as a win for preserving women's right to have access to healthcare and make decisions about their own bodies. That's very important, and this is a win. And good on the Trump administration for continuing this lawsuit and stopping Missouri, Kansas, and Idaho, 3 of our lamest states. That's a joke. To prevent this from happening. So I wanted to mention that because it's a win. We've got a couple wins this week, actually. I also wanted to talk about DEI for a moment. So, this is Fox Business. We have a couple news stories from Fox this week. Look at how right wing we are here. I'm two Fox News stories away from buying a MAGA hat. Um, so, as we know, um, in wake of the election, a lot of companies have been pulling away from DEI, DEI branding, all this type of thing. There's even a video. Right now. Here we go.
A consumer watchdog calling out companies like Kohl's, Dollar Tree, UPS, and Nationwide, to name a few, claiming their diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas are just getting rebranded as inclusion and belonging, or culture of respect. Joining us now, Consumers Research Executive Director Will Held.
This is Fox News, nothing of note here. So this story is the response the Marriott CEO got after he mentioned DEI. So it says here, a hotel industry's top exec has revealed the overwhelming positive support he's received after tackling diversity, equity, and inclusion head on. During the Great Place to Work for All Summit last week, Marriott CEO and President Anthony Capuano spoke to the crowd about the cultural and workplace shifts on DEI and reflected on a moment he was met with unexpected encouragement from tens of thousands of emails from coworkers. The day the DEI executive order came out, I sat with senior leadership team and I said, given the industry-leading position we have, we ought to make sure we're all aligned on not only philosophically how we think about this, which was the easy part, but the words we use, what language we use. We should talk with the board a little bit about it. Capuano said on stage. There's a very big hotel industry investment conference called the ALIS conference, he expanded. And so the next morning I did a media breakfast. I did 6 one-on-one media interviews, and then we did the CEO panel. This was the first question in all 8 of those interactions. President Donald Trump shut down all diversity, equity, and inclusion offices across the federal government during his first week in office and signed a number of executive orders to quickly undo former President Joe Biden's efforts. Not only did Trump shut down all federal offices, he signed 2 other related executive orders in January. One that ended discrimination in the workplace and higher education through race and sex-based preferences under the guise of DEI. The other was a memo to eliminate a Biden administration policy that prioritized DEI hiring at the Federal Aviation Administration. As a result, since then, top U.S.-based brands and companies have rolled back their number of DEI policies like Amazon, Meta, McDonald's, Boeing, Ford, Harley-Davidson, John Deere, Lowe's, Nissan, Toyota, Walmart, and others. When it came time to answer the public on Marriott's stance on DEI, he claimed he mentally phoned a friend. Quote, I thought about what I'd heard from Bill Marriott all these decades, and what I said in response to those questions. We've been around for almost a century. Political winds blow all different directions, and particularly when you operate in almost 150 countries. I said, but there are some fundamental truths about this company that have guided us for those 98 years, the CEO noted. Quote, we welcome all to our hotels, and we create opportunity for all, and fundamentally those never change, right? Capuano continued. The words might change, but that's who we are as a company. Then I went back to my room and said, gosh, I hope I said the right thing. In the next 24 hours, I got 40,000 emails from Marriott associates around the world just saying, thank you. And the reason I bring this up is I think in our whole discussion about this stuff, we kind of forget it's about people. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is about real human beings, giving real human beings a chance, showing them that not only do you do more than tolerate them, you do more than put up with them, you welcome them. They're a part, they're fully invested in all of this. And have very little interest in finding out what Fox Business has to say on this and why they think it's good for companies in the economy to get rid of this stuff. And President Trump's doing a great. Thank you. We know. Thank you. So no new information there. But it is. People do kind of forget. DEI is about people. Fundamentally, it's about people. It's about making people feel like they're actually a part of something and that they matter and that what they're doing is important. And above all, that's what these things are about. And I think in our conversations about DEI, in our dialogue about DEI, we forget the human element. That these things really matter to how people feel if they belong someplace or not. And the fact that, the Marriott CEO and says, we welcome all, we create opportunities for all, that's who we are as a company, and then gets 40,000 emails from his associates, shows that when push comes to shove, it matters.
Gosh, I hope I said the right thing. In the next 24 hours, I got 40,000 emails from Marriott associates around the world just saying thank you. It was interesting. The day the executive order came out, I sat with our senior leadership team and I said, given the industry leading position we have, we ought to make sure we're all aligned on not only philosophically how we think about this, which was the easy part, but what words we use, what language we use. We should talk with the board a little bit about it. So I said to the team, take this week and let's get together in a week. I'm off to Los Angeles. And I flew to Los Angeles that day, and there's a very big hotel industry investment conference called the Alice Conference.
And so the story. Lovely. I thought it was worth mentioning that just because the president doesn't like it as a phrase and there's a lot of political brouhaha about it, doesn't mean it doesn't affect real people. And I'm especially mindful of that today, given present circumstances. I want to jump into the housing market for a minute. So I was very interested in all of this, that how much the housing situation may be holding the economy back. This is from the Streets and Investment publication. It says, a critical industry slamming the economy, the sector's reach is far bigger than most of us realize. And it goes into the difficulties people have buying a home, volatile economy, high mortgage rates, high home prices, incomes that haven't kept pace. Yes. This year started with the hopes that interest rates would slide lower. If they haven't, the economy would offer confidence to homeowners debating whether to assume risks of buying. Nope. Home prices would be sort of stable. No! In fact, it says here, in 2025 has been somewhat a bit of a bummer. Rates on 30-year mortgages have mostly gone up, prices are higher, and the economy was body slammed by President Trump's tariff plan in April. 2 monthly reports this week will offer a picture of the current situation. The National Association of Realtors reporting on April existing home sales due Thursday, and the Commerce Department reports on new home sales in April due Friday. Both of those were up, by the way. The existing home sales report is expected to show sales running at a 4.12 million unit annual rate, up slightly from 4 million in March, and it did, but it would be off nearly 40% from the October 2020 recent peak sales rate of 6.85 million units. The new home sales projection is an annualized 700,000 rate, down from 724,000 sales rate in March, but that rate would be off some 60% from about 1 million new homes sold in 2020. The biggest conundrum homebuyers face in 2025 is that home prices have climbed massively in the last 20 years, incomes have not. The tax of building a down payment to buy a home is difficult at best for first-time buyers, and many would-be buyers are reluctant to saddle themselves with huge mortgage expenses every month with no money left over. Let's say homeowners, they do the math on this. Without first-time buyers, however, move-up buyers can't move on to their next home. The situation is affecting the entire economy. It's one of those things you don't think about, but a home sale affects appliance dealers and manufacturers, hamburger joints, dry cleaners, furniture dealers, paint manufacturers, building supply retailers, real estate brokers, lawyers, title companies, and of course, lenders. The immediate spending a buyer might do on his house or apartment after a sale closes might total 7 to 10% of the sales price. If refurnishing the house, maybe the total hits 30% or more of the home's price. If you're doing a big renovation, the numbers explode. Small wonder the National Association of Home Builders Housing Market Index for May showed builder expectations dropped 8 points to 37 above 50, says the builders are optimistic. Sales expectations for the year have fallen. Traffic of prospective buyers has tumbled. About 34% of builders reported cutting prices, up from 29% in the April report. The average price cut 5%. Builders with a financial muscle, that is big builders like Pulte and D.R. Horton, have used incentives, usually subsidizing mortgage payments for the first few years to make sales. The cost of incentives hit their profits. The demand need to get the country affordably housed is much bigger than that. The National Association of Realtors, admittedly full on favor of home ownership, estimates the entire country needs 367,000 more homes available for sale at no more than $170,000, 416,000 more homes priced at $225,000 or less, and 364,000 homes priced under $340,000. How you get all those homes requires land, water, utilities, roads, cash, enlightened land use officials, and good financial training for buyers and sellers. There's one other issue. People buy homes because they have jobs, but where the jobs are is where the markets are most tight. The tightest markets include California, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Montana, and Idaho. Logic suggests then that jobs need to move out to housing more affordable. This past Friday report on housing starts and building permits showed fewer single-family homes are getting started, but multifamily complexes are up a little. That's why two reports coming this week matter, and so does the context. The Federal Reserve boosted rates 11 times starting in 2022 to combat inflation pressures that erupted after the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. Though the Fed cut its key federal funds rate from 5.25 to ranging to 5.5 to 4.25 to 4.5 in three cuts in late 2024, the residual effects of those increases are still at work in the economy and on the housing market. Then it goes on to say that house building stocks are down. And it talks about all the other companies like Whirlpool and Home Depot that had weak earnings as a result. The other, I think, factor that's also going to affect home construction this year is the 14% tariff on Canadian lumber. We buy a lot of wood from Canada, and that is, if you're building a development and you're buying millions of dollars in lumber, that amounts to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in tax that Canada does not pay. We pay. And it goes to Washington. We're just giving Washington free money. That's basically what we're doing. That's all tariff is. And so it's something where, when we talk about the housing market and affordability of housing, it does have this sort of greater effect on the economy. And I thought that was, worth talking about and worth mentioning because it's kind of like, well, housing is kind of whatever. And it's like, well, not really. Because when you have the housing market not doing well, then you've got, bigger problems. So, I want to start this segment with this video from Scott Galloway, who is talking about pharmaceutical prices. As you may know, or not know, President Trump last week signed an executive order, sort of politely telling the pharmaceutical companies to lower their prices by 50 to 80%. Now, here's the context. Why did you do that? So, the pharmaceutical companies have, quite frankly, a very sweet deal. And it is as follows. What they can do is they can buy the rights to manufacture a drug from a lovely researcher at a university who's gotten government money to research a drug. And then they can continue to develop it, learn how to manufacture it at scale, all this type of thing, invest in it, do the clinical trials. This all takes about 5 to 7 to sometimes 10 years. And then at the end of that period, they can sell it to the whole world. However, the whole world does not pay necessarily at retail prices, or at least not American retail prices. Countries that have universal health care and the government buys the drugs, they negotiate for heavy discounts because of the volume they're buying. Other, organizations will buy drugs for distribution in Africa or elsewhere, and the prices are much, much lower. And oftentimes, the drug makers price drugs lower in certain markets because the market can't bear anything more. So, if you're a pharmaceutical company, how do you recoup all those R&D dollars? Well, you charge the highest prices in the country where the insurance companies are paying for the bulk of the drug costs, and you have justification for high prices because the country in question happens to be fabulously wealthy, and so the reality is American drug costs are 3 to 5 times higher than the rest of the world. And pharmaceutical companies say, well, if you don't let us do that, then we're not going to recoup the cost because we're not charging everyone else as much because they're getting discounts, their markets can't bear it, all this type of thing, whereas in this country, we can do it. That's only true if you have an insurance company paying for your pharmaceuticals. If you're paying them out of pocket, it's horrible. So, and the pharmaceutical companies have spent shitloads to maintain this sort of weird thing where they get to do very little R&D, but still able to recoup those costs on the back of the American consumer while making profits globally. And they make billions of dollars a year. And In this video from Scott Galloway, he talks about how this relationship exists, why it continues, and why the government has never stopped it. Let's listen.
The disappointing thing about our elected representatives is not that they're it's that they're such cheap. And when Cigna or Aetna or Pfizer give a few $1 million to different people, they can figure out laws that make it such that we have to pay 8 times for Ozempic and Humira, despite the fact that we invent, manufacture, and distribute the majority of these drugs. We're number one in terms of IP for pharmaceutical development, but we have figured out a way, or these companies have figured out a way, to charge American consumers more. And then you have an infrastructure where essentially the bill is opaque, and usually your company's paying for it. So what do we have? We have opaque pricing that has no consumer scrutiny. We have regulatory capture, and we have profit-seeking companies which are doing what they're supposed to do. So we end up with $13,000 per capita health care versus $6,500. And in exchange for that, we're more obese and we die sooner. To give you a sense of how outrageous this is, on average, we charge about 4 times the price for pharmaceuticals of what other nations pay. So Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, they produce a lot of oil. Now, why is it less expensive in the kingdom? Because we make a lot of this shit, so let's take advantage of the good work our domestic citizens do providing this exceptional blessing, this sitting on this sea of oil, so we'll give them less expensive gasoline. We produce more oil, i.e. pharmaceuticals, than any firm in the world. Do we in fact charge less for it? No.
It really is that simple. Thank you, Scott Galloway. I mean, honestly, it really is, sadly, that simple of a situation. We're the ones doing all the work that make these great drugs possible, and we're paying the most for it to line the pockets of pharmaceutical companies. And President Trump is trying to bring a curb to it. This the whole day is just going to be great things President Trump is doing. So, abortion pill access staying, trying to lower cost of prescription drugs. I mean, it is, and I mean, Scott is absolutely 100% right. We have the highest healthcare costs in the world for the worst outcomes per capita. If we allocated that money away from health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies and to actually people's health, we would have a robust and healthy country. We all look fantastic because we'd be in such great health. This is part of the wealth extraction exploitation that goes on by corporate America of the average person, which when you start thinking about our housing story, it's kind of like we're in it is no wonder people have a problem with all of this. Your health is bad, you're overpaying for what you get, you're having wealth extracted by every single corporate interaction you have. You cannot afford housing without bending your financial life into pretzel-like contortions. It is no wonder people are unhappy and desperate for a change and look at a system that's corrupt and not serving them. They're right. Their intuition is entirely correct. The system is not serving them. It's serving shareholders. It's serving profit margins. The wealth is being sucked out of everyone in this country, even the rich. They just can afford to have their wealth sucked. But the rest of us who are poorer cannot afford to have our wealth sucked out. We can't afford housing. We can't afford to buy a house. Our drugs are too expensive. I mean, the price of everything has gone up. Incomes have not. I mean, when you have investment publications like Fortune and Forbes and The Street talking about incomes like Occupy Wall Street protesters, that's not great, by the way. That's not a good thing. And the more and more things you look at, the more and more things we uncover, the more and more you find another wealth extractive industry that's just sucking up money into the pockets of a few while everyone else gets exploited. And that's why years ago I called corporations the new aristocracy, because they take all the money and they don't pay taxes. The French would have had a revolution by now, sort of thing. And so it's a good thing that President Trump is trying to do. It's an executive order. From what I've read, there's not really any legal basis to force them to do this, so I don't know what the enforcement plan is, sort of thing, outside of price controls, which would be a very Nixon thing to do. Nixon did love a price control. But beyond that, but it's definitely a problem worth addressing 100% of the way. So I saved that. We're kind of involving some more clips in the show, but I want to save that one because it just surmised the situation so perfectly and is so emblematic of the wealth extractive tendencies of today's economy that has everyday working people frustrated, and rightly so. Let's bounce over here to the bombing in Palm Springs. So, if you're somehow not aware, yesterday, Sunday, a young man in Palm Springs died trying to bomb a fertility clinic. Not an abortion clinic, a fertility clinic. And as it turned, I have another story about this situation, but he was a antinatalist that no one consents to be born, and he was trying to stop more people from being born against their consent. Now, he's a very bad bomber, and why do you ask? Why do I say that? Because he only killed himself. He didn't even hardly damage the facility, and only 4 people were injured. As bombings go, not very good. But as I said in January, we're gonna see more instances of this. And here we are. Let's read. Investigators on Sunday identified a 25-year-old man as the suspect in the bombing outside a fertility clinic in Palm Springs, California, as they searched for the motive behind the blast that damaged several blocks downtown and they believe killed him as well. The suspect, Guy Edward Bartkus of 29 Palms, California, had nihilistic ideations, authorities said, and it specifically targeted the clinic. Officials called the bombing an act of terrorism and said they were examining writings that could be related to the attack, which happened on Saturday. On a website that promotes the idea of a terminating life, an audio recording features a man who said he was going to bomb an in vitro fertilization clinic because he was angry at his own existence. 3 people familiar with the investigation said agents are examining that website to try and verify whether the bomber had made those statements. On Sunday, Richard Bartkus, 75, the father of the suspect, said he believed the voice in the recording was his son's. Mr. Bartkus of Yucca Valley, California, said that he had not seen his son in 10 years and he had no idea his son held opinions of the kind voiced in the recording. Earlier, Mr. Bartkus had said he was shocked when a relative texted him on Saturday that his son had been implicated in the bombing. Although officials did not say that Guy Bartkus was the lone suspect, they did say that they were not actively searching for others. They also said on Sunday that there was no continuing threat to the community involving this attack. Mr. Bartkus described his son as having been a boy who liked tinkering with small model rockets, and said that in September 2009, at age 9, his son lit the family home on fire while playing with matches. Quote, he burned the house down in Yucca Valley, he said, unquote. An article about the fire in the high desert star of Yucca Valley said that the family lost everything, though Mr. Bartkus said no one was hurt. His son was placed in juvenile probation, but the incident was later expunged from his record. Mr. Bartkus said that as a teenager, his son would make, quote, stink bombs and smoke bombs. Nothing major, nothing like a bomb, but he'd build rockets and shoot them in the air. In 2016, a court ordered the son to enter therapy, though the reason and circumstances of the case are unclear. Mr. Bartkus said that his son was impressionable and had often allowed himself to be drawn in by friends who got him into trouble. Once, for example, a friend whose parents owned a wrecking yard talked to his son into smashing cars there. He said that when his son reached his late teens, he built computers and worked with special needs children as an aide as to a local bus driver. He wasn't dumb, Mr. Bartkus said, but he wasn't a leader. He was a follower, he added. If somebody came along and said this was a good idea, he'd probably go along with it. Ideas espoused on the website with the recording plans to bomb the IVF clinic are associated with an obscure movement that both promotes death and discourages creation of new life, said Brian Levin, professor emeritus and founder of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino. Within this movement, IVF is certainly disfavored, but so is procreative sex, Mr. Levin said. He probably targeted an establishment that was most directly related in some way to this twisted take on that philosophy, as fate would have it. And it goes on to the rest of the details, which are not important. However, this is important. Saw this on Twitter. This is supposed to be from some online writings of his. And it says here, the fertility clinic bomber's best friend, and likely love interest, killed herself last month. This was a man unable to cope with the pain someone he loved inflicted on him by following through with their shared philosophical prescriptions. TLDR, suicide is in fact bad. It says here, what finally put you over the edge? I've known for a few years now that I wasn't going to allow myself to make it past my 20s. Recently, my best friend Sophie killed herself. She got the guy she was living with to shoot her while she was sleeping, her preferred method. And I don't think I really knew how much it was going to affect me. I've never related to someone so much and can't imagine I ever would again. We were both anti-sex, don't mistake for asexual. I'm talking like the subreddit r/antisex, misandrous, veg antinatalist, negative utilitarians. Both also had borderline personality disorder. Anyway, we got along quite well, and it was very nice, especially when you feel like you're in an apocalypse and nobody else seems to get anything. We had agreed that if one of us died, the other would probably soon follow. It's just too much of a loss when there's nobody else you really relate to significantly. Since she's dead, I'll link her Reddit and TikTok, where she made a few videos. She also had a Tumblr account that she was very active on. She said more videos on her YouTube account, but I guess she hid them before. This is a sad, misguided, unfortunate situation. Obviously, given the present circumstances in my own life, this all hits a little close to home. I'm just glad that out of this whole thing, more people weren't hurt. This is a situation where we have to contain the damage, sort of thing. I'm sure there will be more news about this come out. The Biden cancer thing has kind of wiped it off the headlines today, so we may not hear too much more about it, but I'll be interested to see what else comes out. I'll keep an eye on it. It's speaking of that, we'll move on to the next story. In interesting immigration news today, the Supreme Court let Trump lift deportation protections for Venezuelans. Now, what happened here? In years past, Venezuelans were allowed, because of the political situation in Venezuela, were allowed to immigrate to this country on a temporary protected status. Many were coming illegally and they got the status, others immigrated under that status. It's about 300,000 people, a not insignificant number. The Trump administration had wanted to remove their temporary protected status so they could deport all of them back to Venezuela very, very quickly. And the Supreme Court seems to have allowed them to do such a thing. And why is this important? This is a big win for the Trump administration in terms of getting to the place of mass deportations. Getting to the place where they can, remove the bad people, the gang members, all this type of thing, especially with their obsession with, migrant gangs, and we're going to get to the about Tren de Aragua. This is a big win for the Trump administration in terms of getting to their goal of being able to, mass deport people. And it says here, the Supreme Court on Monday let the Trump administration, for now, remove protections from nearly 350,000 Venezuelan immigrants who have been allowed to remain in the United States without risk of deportation under a program known as temporary protected status. That fellow, Abrego Garcia, who was sent to El Salvador, he was here under this thing too. The court's brief order was unsigned and gave no reasons, which is typical when the justices rule on emergency applications. No vote count was listed, although Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson noted that she would have denied the administration's request. The justices announced they would allow the Trump administration to end the protections pending appeal of the case, potentially allowing the administration to move ahead with deportations. The justices also appeared to suggest that some of the Venezuelans who had been able to receive documentation of their legal status before the Trump administration terminated the program could sue to challenge their deportations. In a separate case, the justice on Friday criticized the administration for seeking to provide only a day's warning to a different group of Venezuelan immigrants in Texas it had been trying to deport under the expansive powers of the Alien Enemies Act, an 18th century wartime law. The Trump administration has accused that group of migrants of being members of the violent gang Tren de Aragua. Monday's order affects a much broader swath of Venezuelans currently living in the United States legally under the terms of a Biden-era program. The court has been inundated with applications arising from President Trump's blitz of executive orders, many of them seeking to pause or limit trial court rulings, blocking the administration's aggressive agenda, notably on immigration. Ooh, that's a long name. I'm not going to butcher that. Ahilan, we'll say that part, a lawyer representing the immigrants challenging the Trump administration, called the court's decision truly shocking, especially that it was announced, quote, in a 2-paragraph order with no reasoning. Quote, this is the largest single action stripping any group of non-citizens of immigration status in modern U.S. history. The humanitarian and economic impact of the court's decision will be felt immediately and will reverberate for generations. Tricia McLaughlin, a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security, called the decision, quote, a win for the American people and the safety of our communities. Quote, the Biden administration exploited the parole programs to let poorly vetted migrants into this country from MS-13 gang members to known terrorists and murderers, she said. The Trump administration is reinstituting integrity into our immigration system to keep our homeland and its people safe. And it goes on to the history of the case and to the way it wound its way through the circuit courts. Why is this important? Well, it's an early win for this particular subset of immigrants. I think it also lays the groundwork for the Trump administration to get legal cover for other parts of their immigration agenda. Like I said, the goal is to get to the place of mass deportations. This definitely opens the door to especially Venezuelans, but other groups as well, and moving them through very quickly. And that, I mean, it is a big win, and it is, largest, group that basically, you were legal yesterday and today you're not, and under this order they can, ship them out en masse in military planes, and probably send a few more criminals to El Salvador and all this sort of thing. So it's, if you are, a pro-immigrant advocate sort of thing, this is pretty devastating. And like I said, it sets up, it shows the court's willingness to let the Trump administration go a certain degree in their plan of mass deportations of illegal immigrants. One of the things I always love about immigration is the numbers that get thrown around. There's been 20 million immigrants let in. There's no evidence of that, by the way. Just putting that out there. This is a lot of Venezuelans, but it's, about the size of the population of Wyoming, sort of thing. And they are relatively new, only here a few years. But yeah, it's quite a difficult, thing, and it definitely gives them what they need to, at least for these immigrants, to remove their status and get them out of here. There are other groups that have temporary protected status, like Haitian immigrants and some Cuban immigrants, and that definitely will probably be next on their list of people to get rid of and move along. But I also agree, the reality is these people are probably doing great work in very thankless jobs in agriculture and elsewhere. You'll notice when they leave, when the meatpacking plant has a now hiring sign and can't seem to find anybody. So, in economic news, this happened over, I think Thursday, Friday last. We've had another credit downgrade. So, way back in 2011, so there's three big rating agencies: Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor's. The S&P or Standard & Poor's downgraded U.S. debt from AAA to AA in 2011. Fitch downgraded it in 2023. It says right here. And now Moody's has downgraded as well, which means we now don't have the best credit rating in the world at any major ratings agency. When it comes to our conversation about debt, borrowing costs, deficits, and we have more on that down the road of stories, this is not great. Bond yields, I think, were already up last night to over 4.5 for 10 and 30-year Treasury. Japan's bonds were also up a disturbing amount as well. And people think we have a debt problem. Japan is 250% of GDP. We're only 131%. We're in great fiscal shape compared to Japan. And our population isn't aging as fast as theirs, and we're not having demographic collapse as fast as they are. So the story says here that the credit rating of the United States received a potentially costly downgrade on Friday, as the ratings for Moody's determined that the government's rising debt levels started to grow further. Republicans enact a package of new tax cuts, which we're going to get to because they want to make the 2017 Trump tax cuts that are supposed to sunset at the end of this year permanent, and it's going to explode the deficit. We'll talk about that in a minute. It says here that the downgrade to one notch below the highest AAA rating amended to a repudiation of Washington, where President Trump only hours earlier had pushed his party to adopt a legislative package that might add trillions of dollars to the nation's fiscal imbalance. The downgrade from Moody's means that each of the three major credit rating agencies no longer gives the United States its best rating. The new rating decrease could send ripple effects throughout the economy if it prompts investors to demand higher payments on bonds, which in turn could raise consumers' borrowing costs. So far, though, past downgrades have proved largely symbolic, as the American government's debt remains the bedrock of the global financial system. Moody's pointed to decades of gridlock and dysfunction in the nation's capital. It found that Democrats and Republicans alike had failed to meaningfully curtail U.S. debt, which now towers above $3.6 trillion. Nor had the U.S. government addressed myriad well-known and long-term financial challenges, Moody said, especially the rising costs and persistent underfunding of programs like Social Security and Medicare. While Moody's described the U.S. financial system as stable and found the dollar to be strong and reliable, it also acknowledged the vast policy uncertainty, and it obliquely referred to the ways in which political stability and constitutional order can be tested at times. Quote, successive U.S. administrations and Congress have failed to agree on measures to reverse the trend of large annual fiscal deficits and growing interest costs, the report from Moody said. We do not believe the material multi-year reductions in mandatory spending and deficits will result from current fiscal proposals under consideration. Moody specifically referred to the push to renew the expensive tax cuts adopted under Mr. Trump in 2017, a task that Republicans are now struggling with on Capitol Hill. The party is trying to offset some of the roughly $3.8 trillion cost of lowering taxes with cuts to spending on health care, clean energy incentives, and food stamps. But the scope and approach of the package have divided Republican lawmakers, with hard-right conservatives demanding steeper cuts as some moderates caution against taking benefits away from too many Americans. On Friday, some conservatives seized on the Moody's downgrade to call for deeper spending cuts as part of their party's imperiled domestic policy bill. Moody's downgrade of America's debt is a signal that we can wait no longer to address the debt crisis, said Representative Andy Harris, Republican of Maryland, in a post on social media. He added that he was, quote, not supporting, unquote, the tax package without substantial changes. Even with its existing spending cuts, the Republican package is expected to add significantly to the debt. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimated that the current version of the bill overall would cost $2.7 trillion over a decade before counting additional borrowing costs. That number could easily grow if Congress later extends measures like no tax on tips, which under this piece of legislation would last only 4 years. Kush Desai, White House spokesman, sought to blame the Moody's downgrade on the administration of former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. The Trump administration and Republicans are focused on fixing Biden's mess by slashing the waste, fraud, and abuse in the government and passing the one big beautiful bill to get our house back in order, he said in a statement. The prospect of much more government borrowing, when interest rates are already elevated, has made some bond investors nervous. So-called vigilantes in the bond market have been selling the government's debt as the Republican tax package has wound its way through Congress, contributing to higher yields, which in turn translate into higher interest rates on consumer borrowing. The 10-year Treasury bond yield has risen roughly 0.3 percentage points this month to around 4.5%. The 30-year Treasury yield briefly crossed 5% this week. The last time it did that, during some of the worst tariff fears, Mr. Trump cited the bond market among reasons he pared back his tariff proposals. It's a sign that the government could end up paying a higher interest rate on its debt if it can't soothe investors' concerns over its mounting debt, a development that could snowball into a full-blown debt crisis for the world's largest economy. Moody's announced the downgrade just before bond markets closed on Friday, so investors will have to wait until Sunday to respond. So that is the Moody's downgrade. You may have heard about that, you may not have, but it's quite a significant moment in terms of the debt and deficit crisis, especially as the big beautiful bill is winding its way through Congress. Want to grab this headline real quick before we talk about other things. Conservatives imperil GOP mega bill that would fulfill Trump's agenda. Conservatives on the House Budget Committee on Friday blocked their party's mega bill from reaching the floor, citing concerns that the legislation to fulfill President Trump's domestic agenda would add too much to the deficit. It was a remarkable revolt that threatened to upend the party's goal of pushing legislation through the House before its Memorial Day recess and sent Republican leaders scrambling to try to put down the uprising. The setback underscored the treacherous balancing act that Speaker Mike Johnson is trying to pull off. Without the support of Republican hardliners in the Budget Committee, the bill cannot advance. But any changes to win their backing could alienate the more moderate Republicans, whose votes will also be needed to pass the measure on the House floor. 5 Republican representatives, Chip Roy of Texas, Ralph Norman of South Carolina, Josh Brecheen of Oklahoma, Andrew Clyde of Georgia, and Lloyd Smucker of Pennsylvania joined Democrats in voting to block the legislation. The vote was 16-21 on a motion to advance the bill. This bill falls profoundly short. It does not do what it say it does with respect to deficits, Mr. Roy said ahead of the vote, explaining his opposition. Deficits will go up in the first half of the 10-year budget window, and we all know it's true, and we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't say we're doing something we're not doing. A few hours after the vote failed, committee leaders announced that the panel would reconvene Sunday at 10 p.m. to reconsider legislation. It was not clear what, if any, changes Republican leaders agreed to before calling lawmakers back. But ultimately, after the vote, they had not seemed optimistic. The committee's chairman, Representative Jody C. Arrington of Texas, told its members they could return home to their districts. Well, the noes have it, Mr. Arrington said. I want to thank everybody for their time and patience, and Godspeed and safe travels. Mr. Smucker, who changed his yes vote to a no vote at the last minute, said he did so for procedural reasons. Because he voted against the bill, he'll be able to ask to call the legislation back up for consideration once Republicans broker a deal. The legislation the party is trying to push through would make Mr. Trump's 2017 tax cuts permanent and eliminate taxes on tips and overtime pay through 2028, fulfilling a campaign pledge. Cuts to Medicaid, food stamps, and subsidies for clean energy would partly offset the roughly $3.8 trillion cost of those tax measures over 10 years, as well as increased spending on the military and immigration enforcement. But the conservatives are demanding changes to the bill, arguing that their leaders did not go far enough to cut federal spending. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan group that calls for lower deficits, and estimated the bill would add roughly $3.3 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. A number of House conservatives have said they do not want to vote for legislation unless it's deficit neutral, which would mean cutting a lot. And you know what's interesting, though? What's really interesting? In January, they announced 8% reductions in defense spending every year for the next 5 years. It's not in this bill. Defense spending actually increases to over $1 trillion, sort of thing. I mean, and that's really if you're going to tackle the deficit meaningfully. There are two places you have to take it from: Medicare, Medicaid, and defense. Because if you don't cut there, there's not enough of everything else to matter. There just isn't. Very simple. There just isn't. And so, the fact that they're not meaningfully, they're doing Medicaid cuts of $880 billion over the next 10 years. They are only doing, but they're not doing the defense cuts, sort of thing. They're cutting other small minor programs, but it's not amounting enough to really move the needle on a deficit that runs almost $1 trillion a year. You know, in the middle of understanding our debt situation, we have $9 trillion to refinance this year, and, you know, yields are going higher. The borrowing cost, the amount of interest we're paying on the debt, is over $1 trillion. If you're going to get serious about this, and I agree that they should, if you're going to get serious, then you've got to get serious. And this bill isn't. So I don't mean to agree with Mr. Smucker of Pennsylvania, but Mr. Smucker ain't wrong. So let's talk about President Trump's recent transportation transaction. So, as you probably know by now, Mr. Trump was over in the Middle East this week, and he was collecting billions of dollars in new investment and agreements on AI and all this type of thing. Lovely, lovely. However, he also picked up something for himself. A $400 million new flying palace. From a gift from Qatar, because the new Air Force One that he had started building during his first term is still not done. Now, as a side note, I actually looked into that situation, thanks to Fox Business. Here it says, Boeing's new Air Force One delayed until 2029 or later. So, says here, Boeing's new Air Force One jetliner that will eventually be tasked with transporting the U.S. president will be delayed until 2029 or later, Fox Business has learned. This is from... when is this from? February. A Trump administration official confirmed to Fox Business, Edward Lawrence, that the next generation Air Force One jet is delayed due to issues that primary contractor Boeing has attributed to global supply chains and changing project requirements. It is ridiculous that the delivery of a new Air Force One airplane has been delayed for such a long time, White House Communications Director Stephen Chung told Fox Business President Trump is working on identifying ways to speed up the delivery of a new plane which has been needed for a while. Fox Business reached out to Boeing for comment. The contract for a new Air Force One was initially awarded to Boeing in 2018 when it received a $3.9 billion contract to build two 747-8 aircraft for use as Air Force One that were to be delivered by December of 2024. But subsequent delays led to that being pushed back to 2027 or 2028, with a new delay pushing that back further. The Boeing 747-8s that will eventually serve as Air Force One are designed to be an airborne White House that can fly in worst-case security scenarios such as nuclear war, and are modified with military avionics, advanced communications, and a self-defense system. Ted Colbert, the then head of Boeing Defense, Space and Security, who has since left the company, said in July that Boeing was dealing with supply chain inflation, workforce, and other challenges in building the airplanes, which were heavily modified versions of 747 airliners. Boeing has lost more than $2 billion on the program amid the delays. Quote, our team is fighting through a very, very challenging program. Two very complex airplanes, Colbert said at the time. We've done a lot of investment in our workforce in training efficiency and work on the factory floor. The nonpartisan Government Accountability Office said in 2022 that the Air Force One program risked further delay because of a tight labor market for mechanics, lower than expected security clearance rates, and Boeing's need to switch to an alternative supplier for some interior work. In 2023, the Biden administration chose to modify but continue with an Air Force One paint scheme that resembles the current white on two shades of blue. The design dates back to the Kennedy administration, and the Biden move reversed a decision made by President Trump during his first term, switched to a red, white, and blue scheme. Boeing said the Department of Defense also investigated 2023 security clearance lapse that resulted in hundreds of Boeing employees working on the secretive Air Force One planes with expired credentials for months or years before they were temporarily suspended from accessing work areas once the documentation issue was discovered. The lapsed Yankee White security clearances impacted about 250 employees, and once it was discovered, the Air Force and Boeing were worked to reinstate those clearances. Nearly all regained their current valid top-secret clearances, and no workers lost their clearances. Boeing said at the time the issue had no impact on the timeline for the new Air Force One jets. And so, because of the delay in a new one of these, President Trump has decided to take in a new plane from Qatar. And Republican lawmakers are voicing concern. Says here, the chorus of reservations being expressed by Republican lawmakers represents a rare break with the president, who typically enjoys near total unanimity from the party. On Wednesday, Representative Michael McCall, Republican of Texas, was among those taking issue with the idea. McCall said that he certainly received gifts in his former role as chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and believed countries can gift to other countries, but a luxury Boeing 747 jet may go too far. Quote, this one's pretty lavish, McCall said in a brief interview. I would certainly sweep to make sure there aren't any surveillance bugs on it. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley said the move signals that Qatar is looking to get close to the U.S., but should instead be cutting ties with militant Islamic groups. He argued that the president's plane should not come from a foreign nation. I prefer a big, beautiful plane built in the United States, made in America, bought in America, he said. National security and aviation experts say the offer, first reported by ABC News, comes with plenty of risks. For his part, Trump said the existing Air Force One planes are old and expensive to maintain, and has long complained about the time it has taken for Boeing to deliver a pair of replacements that he agreed to pay $3.9 billion for during his first term. Shortly before leaving on his current Middle East tour, Trump said it would be, quote, stupid not to accept the jet. On Tuesday night, he again defended the plan, saying the plane was being offered as a gift to the Department of Defense, not to him. Why should our military, and therefore our taxpayers, be forced to pay hundreds of millions of dollars when they can get it for free from a country that wants to reward us for a job well done, Trump said on social media. The move would call for a Qatari plane to be retrofitted to serve as the new Air Force One, a complicated process that could stretch for years. Trump has said the plane would be decommissioned after his term and then put on display at his presidential library. He's also said he would not use it after leaving office. His comments followed remarks Tuesday by some of his biggest supporters, including Senators Ted Cruz of Texas and Rand Paul of Kentucky, who say the effort presents security and legal challenges. Some inside the party, including Senate Majority Leader John Thune, caution, the plan is far from a sure thing. Quote, I don't think there's anything official out there. This is hypothetical, Thune told reporters. I am sure if and when it's no longer hypothetical, I can assure there will be plenty of scrutiny of whatever that arrangement might look like. Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska, said there are enough questions surrounding the gift to trigger pause for the president. Quote, I got a lot of concerns, she said. Quote, I don't imagine it's going to go forward, but maybe they're looking at it differently than me. Others in the party were less worried and dismissed concerns that the gift represented a potential avenue for spying on the U.S. Quote, yeah, I 100% support it, said Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, a member of the Armed Services Committee. For anybody that has security concerns about it, they're absolutely ignorant on intelligence. We are the best in the world at it. We understand what they could do, and we understand how to find it better than anybody, Mullen said. Senate Democrats have already been planning to bring up a resolution of disapproval on the plans to gift the plane, but several concede that's expected to fail. Democrats say the gift is a clear violation of the Constitution's Foreign Emoluments Clause, which forbids official office holders from accepting a present of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. Rhode Island Democrat Senator Jack Reed, the party's top member on the Senate Armed Services Committee, said Democrats plan to ask the Department of Defense for estimates to retrofit the jet, a figure he argues could bring the total price tag close to $1 billion. These aircraft are so unique, Reed said. You have to ensure that there is nothing in the plane that's an intelligence source for someone else. You literally have to take it apart, the plane, and put it together. He also noted that, quote, one of the other ironies, unquote, was that the U.S. manufacturer who would likely be needed to retrofit the plane for the president is Boeing, the same company that already contracted to build new planes to be used as Air Force One. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat Connecticut, admitted that Democratic efforts to force a vote on resolution disapproving of the gift are unlikely to succeed, so he pointed to an upcoming vote to approve U.S. arms deals to Qatar as a chance to make Republicans go on the record. Quote, there's no doubt that the vote will be a proxy on whether you think it's okay for a foreign government to hand a $400 million plane to the President of the United States, unquote. The debate over the plane has put plenty of Republicans in a bind over how to respond. House Speaker Mike Johnson avoided addressing the dilemma with reporters on Wednesday. Johnson said his focus was on the reconciliation bill that House Republicans are hoping to pass on Memorial Day to enact the president's domestic agenda. There are authorities that police the executive branch, Johnson said. That's not me, unquote. Wrong! That is you! You're in Congress! That's your job! Anyway, no, Mr. Johnson, please read the Constitution. Yes, Mike, there are authorities to police the executive branch, and that's you. The story goes on to say, despite Johnson's remark, Congress does in fact have the authority to investigate the executive branch. When Democrats controlled the House during Trump's first term, for example, they conducted oversight of the Trump hotel and maintained its arrangement on the lease, and money from foreign dignitaries who stayed in the hotel violated ethics rules. Yeah, exactly. Like, no, Mr. Johnson, that's your job. You are the oversight. Like, but honey, that's you. Like, there are people that do that, right? Yes, that's you, sort of thing. So, I want to dash through. So I want to start with this story first, because President Trump has been going around saying that there's $9 trillion in new U.S. investment that is coming in thanks to all his wonderful deals that are happening. And this number got mentioned to me enough that I wanted to go look at it, and I found this great story from CBS News. It says, after President Trump was pressed on rising consumer prices and slowing economic growth, he defended his tariff policies by claiming he had spurred record investment in the United States. Quote, I think we probably have close to $9 trillion of investments coming into this country, Mr. Trump said in an interview on NBC's Meet the Press that aired Sunday. If you look at other presidents, there's never been anything like that. He's also repeatedly claimed that he has secured more investment in his first 2 months than President Biden did in 4 years. Neither claim is supported by evidence. CBS News confirmed found. While companies have announced hundreds of billions of dollars in planned investments since Mr. Trump's January 20th inauguration, the White House has not provided data that shows the total approaching $9 trillion. Additionally, a CBS News review found that some investments highlighted by the White House were announced before Mr. Trump's re-election. The comparison to the Biden administration is also misleading. The president is citing future investment pledges while contrasting them with a narrower list of projects that were in the works or completed by the end of his predecessor's term. Here's a breakdown of the claims. Some investments that Trump claims credit for were announced under Biden. The White House on April 29th said Mr. Trump had secured $5 trillion of U.S. investment in his first 100 days and published a partial list titled The Trump Effect, which it said demonstrated that his America First economic policies would spark trillions of dollars in new investment. That list totals closer to $2 trillion from private companies, and around $5 trillion of commitments from foreign countries are included. The basis for the president's $9 trillion claim is unclear, and the administration has not explained the discrepancy. A closer look at the White House list also shows some of the investments have been announced before Mr. Trump took office. The list initially included a $4.1 billion commitment from Novelis, a Georgia-based aluminum company, to build a plant in southern Alabama, but construction for that project began in October 2022, and the $4.1 billion total investment was detailed in the company's February 2024 financial report. The Trump administration also claimed credit for a $1.5 million pledge by Corning to invest in its solar products facility in Michigan. A company spokesperson confirmed to CBS News that $900 million of the funding was announced months before Mr. Trump assumed office. Likewise, the White House listed Johnson & Johnson's commitment to spend $55 billion over the next 4 years, but a company spokesperson confirmed that the total includes a $2 billion investment announced last October in a facility in Wilson, North Carolina. The list also includes the Stargate project, a $500 billion AI infrastructure initiative announced by OpenAI and Japan-based SoftBank on January 21st, which had been in development for at least a year before Mr. Trump's inauguration. The company said $100 billion would be deployed immediately, but offered few specifics on where and how the money would be spent. Mr. Trump has repeatedly said he attracted more investment in the 2 months than Biden did in 4 years, suggesting he brought in billions in a matter of weeks while casting doubt the former president secured even $1 trillion during his term. But there's no clear evidence to support his claim. A White House spokesperson said the president was referring to a December 2024 report from the Biden White House, which said the private sector committed at least $1 trillion to clean energy and manufacturing projects during Biden's term. However, Biden's list of investments highlighted, quote, a selection of private sector investments in 21st century industries, including green energy, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, based on project announcements in specific locations or factories under construction. The data on Biden's Investing in America spreadsheet also showed projects that closely resemble some on Mr. Trump's list. By comparison, the Trump administration's list includes broader, less specific investment pledges across a variety of industries, many without clear timelines or locations. For example, Mr. Trump's list highlights Apple's recent $500 billion pledge to U.S. manufacturing and training. However, as previously reported by the Washington Post, Apple also announced a $430 billion investment early in Biden's term, including a North Carolina engineering hub that was paused in 2024. And the Biden administration's report does not include any Apple's investments in its tally. However, experts caution that announcements about planned investments don't guarantee action. Quote, companies will often make announcements to essentially curry favor with an incoming administration to show how committed they are to the United States, said Nick Negro, the founder of Atlas Public Policy, which tracks clean energy investments in the U.S. It is not unusual whether it was President Trump, President Biden, or President Obama. Presidents from both parties have claimed credit for projects started under their predecessors. For instance, pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly announced investments during Mr. Trump's first term, some of which contributed to the construction of manufacturing facilities highlighted by the Biden White House investment report. During his term, Biden signed major pieces of legislation, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, which included $24 billion in tax credits to attract private investors in hopes of driving domestic manufacturing commitments. Such incentives may continue to fuel further projects during Mr. Trump's term, according to Negro, provided they remain in place. But the long-term impact of federal policy, including under both Biden and Mr. Trump, may take years to assess. So, I thought that was an excellent breakdown of the 9 trillion number you're going to hear running around a lot of right-wing circles and everything. That's, you're not going to hear that number on social media, so now we're aware it's a mix of both Biden and Trump era stuff. It's a lot of commitments. It's not exactly a shovel-ready situation. I also wanted to stop by and talk about, let me pause on CNBC, and talk about inflation real quick. So annual inflation right now is 2.3% in April, less than expected and lowest since 2021. Obviously, this is fantastic. No complaints here. And it also says, the core CPI, I don't need this because the core CPI number is here. The consumer price index rose a seasonally adjusted 0.2% for the month, putting the 12-month inflation rate at 2.3%, its lowest since February 2021. The core CPI has also increased 0.2% for the month, while the year-over-year level was 2.8%. Egg prices tumbled, falling 12.7%, though they were still up 49.3% from a year ago. While the April CPI figures are relatively tame, the Trump tariffs remain a wild card in the inflation picture, depending on where negotiations go between now and the summer. Oh, that's an excellent video about rising treasury yields. Inflation was slightly lower than expected in April as President Donald Trump's tariffs just began hitting the slowing U.S. economy, according to a Labor Department report Tuesday. The Consumer Price Index, which measures the cost for a broad range of goods and services, rose a seasonally adjusted 0.2% for the month. Excluding volatile food and energy prices, core CPI also increased 0.2% for the month, while the year-over-year level was 2.8%. The forecast was for 0.3% and 2.8% respectively. And so we kind of see here the grand arc of we hit the peak of inflation in June of 2022. It hits kind of a low at the beginning of 23, and then it's kind of been on this bumpy road and hits 3% in November. We were down to 2.4% in September. We ticked slightly higher at the end of the year, and then now we are almost back to 2021. So the food and the Fed's plan to lower inflation has worked. The other interesting thing about this chart when it comes to inflation is the big blue line is all items, which includes food and energy, and the dotted line is without food and energy. So we see that a lot of the reduction is also because of falling food and energy prices. Because less food and energy, it would be slightly higher. actually. And some of that has to do with housing. So that's a very interesting kind of report on inflation. And the consumer price index were here. So we didn't have a reduction. We just grew less slowly, which is much better than where we were in 2022 when the price of things was increasing, exponentially. So we also see kind of here this graph here as well. So I wanted to check in on inflation and just be open and transparent about where we are. This isn't really a Trump issue because he hasn't really been in office long enough to affect it. I will be very interested now that the tariffs are kind of here to stay and companies are beginning to process those through margin and everything, what we're like about 6 months from now. If the tariffs cause a big uptick in inflation, you're going to notice it right away. So the Fed's target for inflation is usually 2% for all items. So we're very, very close, which would explain also why they kept steady interest rates at their last meeting in April. Because, they are thinking that they don't need to raise interest rates and throttle the economy. If they keep them where they're at, it will continue reducing demand enough to get down to the 2% per year. So, good news on inflation. We have all sorts of good news today. And this final story is kind of an interesting sort of thing. So the founder of Gumroad, Sahil Lavingia, had a second job with the VA, and it's kind of interesting how he's surprised at how government is working. And it says here that to hear it from Lavingia, Elon Musk backed Doge was a shortcut in a direction he already saw himself going. Years ago, during the Obama administration, he applied to the United States Digital Service, the predecessor organization to Doge, only to find the hiring process arduous. While he officially works for the VA, Doge gave him an inroad into government work that didn't force him to go through a complicated vetting process. They just sent me to the VA, he says. They kind of helped me find the job, which is great, and I'm proud of that. Reflecting his tongue-in-cheek stance that Doge is a glorified temp agency for software engineers, he got through the side entrance, offering his services to the cause of government efficiency. I'm basically taking Elon at his word, he admits. Lavinchia's decision to moonlight, not exactly unheard of in Doge circles, doesn't necessarily tie to his primary gig. But he suggested it all might have inspired his recent decision to open source Gumroad. After all, it matches what he's proposing with Doge. Quote, I think we should open source all the code that we write, he says of his VA work. And I think if we did that, I'm not saying people will agree with us, I think we'll see what we're doing. His VA side hustle comes at a time when Gumroad itself was going through some major structural changes. Last year, the company rebranded its corporate structure as Anti-Work, inspired directly by popular Reddit community of the same name. As part of its restructuring, it began putting its various apps on GitHub, including Gumroad. In one sense, this was a positive mood for tech firms who run web apps and other software on their own infrastructure. Now they have a new tool at their disposal, and Gumroad has pledged to make it easier for them to install and maintain its code in the coming months. The interesting part... Oh, here it is. Lavinchia said the timing of his work at the VA is coincidental, but it helped inspire his thinking about open sourcing. He used the example of Drupal. And here... What was the paragraph that I was looking for? And I missed it because I went back to the top. Here we are. But hearing a first-person perspective of what's happening on the ground from Lavingia is nonetheless revealing. He's someone who's gone from being the big fish in a tiny pond to just another person in an agency that counts more than 400,000 employees on its payroll. Though, as with elsewhere in the federal government, it's also seeing cuts. Now that he's there, he finds himself surrounded by people who, quote, love their jobs, unquote, who came to government with a sense of mission driving their work. Quote, in a sense, that makes the Doge agenda a little bit more complicated because if half the government took a buyout offer, then we wouldn't have to do much more, quote, he said, implying the software can replace departing employees. We just basically use software to plug holes, but that's not what's happening. Lavinchia's skills with automation, which have helped keep Gumroad lean, and are what he hopes to bring to the VA, but when it comes down to it, what he's found is a machine that largely functions, though it doesn't make decisions as fast as a startup might. Quote, I would say the culture shock is mostly a lot of meetings and a lot of decisions, he says. But honestly, it's kind of fine because the government works. It's not as inefficient as I was expecting. To be honest, I was hoping for more easy wins, unquote. In contrast to Doge's shadowy reputation, Lavingia has made a case for transparency. Based on a pledge she received from Musk during a meeting, Lavingia has been open sourcing his VA work, creating tools that can generate org charts and detect compliance with the president's executive orders. If you aren't a fan of Doge's work, the open source code, while useful for transparency, probably won't make you feel any better about Lavingia's work at the VA. The compliance code, for example, is effectively a Python script that hooks into OpenAI servers hosted on Microsoft Azure, detecting whether an federal agency's communication references a chief diversity officer's pronouns or World Health Organization partnerships. However, Lavingia makes it clear that Doge has limits, especially thanks to the court decisions and palace intrigue that have removed much of its bite. Ultimately, he argues, it has become a way for roving engineers to get an up-close view of how government works. A, quote, McKinsey for the government, unquote, as he puts it. Quote, I think Doge both gets too much credit and too much blame, he says. Blame the people who actually have the authority to make the decisions. I'm like, it's like when people say billionaires are evil. I'm like, well, maybe, but really the people at fault would be the lawmakers, right? I don't know, unquote. that sentence surmises Silicon Valley's entire attitude towards politics, by the way. I'm like, well, maybe, but really, the fault people are the lawmakers, right? I don't know. Like, that's Silicon Valley politics in a sentence. Right there, if you want to understand how anybody in Silicon Valley thinks about politics, that's it. That's it. And I think it's funny that he shows up and is like, we're going to fix the government, only to find, actually, this really works. And he goes on to say, Lavingia strikes me as someone who generally cares about the work he's doing, but who thinks about it like a software engineer. There may be a case for startup lifers to swoop in and out of government, sharing the latest technical innovations with a complex beast in dire need of more efficiency. But the move fast and break things style may simply be too swift and damaging when essential government services are on the line. No matter how Lavingia sees things from a day-to-day perspective, the truth is that people who feel betrayed by government's association with Doge have a new reason to go with another creator-friendly tool. And it goes into people being complaining about that. But the point of the story was he didn't find that the VA was as terrible as they thought he was. It does give government these sort of tools. They're kind of allowing him to sort of moonlight doing both things at once. And his sort of, like, well, shouldn't the politicians be doing something? Like, I don't know, this makes no sense sort of thing. Is Silicon Valley politics in a tweet. Why is all this important? Why do we care? Just because Elon is stepping back from Doge and a lot of what Doge is doing isn't really happening, you don't hear much anymore. There are stories like these, cases like these, where there's going to be an effect from the people that have been brought in. And I think one of the interesting things is because of Elon, because of Doge, because of Trump, a group of people who probably would have never sought out government work, this guy was, but had never sought government work, and would probably never get hired by the government, have sort of been swept up into government work. And that is, I think, interesting for both parties, because when all of this is over, however it ends, you're going to be having Silicon Valley is going to understand, you're going to have more people in Silicon Valley understanding about government, and you're going to have more people in government understanding about new modernization tools, all this type of thing. And you're going to end up with this sort of real exchange of ideas, information, processes, systems that are going to, I think, affect both in a really interesting way. Long term, more of this could be really interesting. And perhaps in future, every administration should invite people who are successful to moonlight in agencies like this in a real way, causing real change and breaking through some of the bureaucratic gridlock that happens by nature of running large organizations with employees of 400,000 people. So, I think that's interesting. I appreciate you all for coming. I appreciate you all for watching. Long one tonight, but that's okay. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. If you've not signed up for the newsletter that comes out every Saturday, please do so at CameronJournal.com/newsletter to get the Cameron Journal delivered right to your inbox. It's the best place to be in town. And if you aren't there, what are you doing? Make sure to follow me on social media. All the links are at CameronJournal.com. If you love my coverage and love this show and you want to support the Cameron Journal, please consider joining Cameron Journal Plus, CameronJournal.com/subscribe. And you can support the Cameron Journal and support my work in journalism and all the stuff that I do. I would really appreciate it. It's only $5 a month. So for a cup of coffee a month, you can make sure I get to continue to do this. And thank you to my existing Cameron Journal Plus subscribers. We love you. You're awesome. That's it for me. Please don't forget to find me on Twitter at Cameron Cowan, at Cameron Journal on TikTok, and I will see you next Monday. This has been the Cameron Journal Newshour. My name is Cameron Cowan. Have a great night. Bye-bye.